James Stavridi's retired United States Navy. That's going to be his song. Three ships come sailing in, and Admiral Stavridi's probably at the helm of one of them. Good morning, Admiral. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good to be back and wishing I was out at sea myself these days.
I'll bet. Don't worry. The help is on the way. It's rolling out. I had a PhD toxicologist tell me this week that Operation Warp Speed is a scientific and logistical miracle without precedent in the history of science, and it's because the United States military is delivering the prefabricated doses. We've already made millions of doses. I don't think Americans know that they're being flown around the world in part by the logistical capacity of the Pentagon, which is immense.
Yeah, this is a classic case study of where the military does things besides war. This is a case where you bring that enormous logistic, planning, delivery, stockpiling. That's what we do during peacetime. We know how to do this. So this is a case that is absolutely made for the U.S. military. I'm very proud of the folks that are doing it on the ground and in the air, frankly.
Now, Admiral, I want to talk to you about a delicate subject. I'm pretty sure you probably know everyone who's on the top of the list for Secretary of Defense, and you know them well, whether it's Jay Johnson or the general, and we talked about Michelle Flournoy. So I am confused because I thought Michelle Flournoy was a mortal lock, as they say in the business of musicals, and I hope it's still her, given her vast experience. But what are they looking for? Well, I mean, what's the skill set? We did this last week, but let's break it down. There's never been a woman in the senior chain of command. So I tried in my civilian way to explain what that means. Maybe you can start there. What is the senior chain of command?
Well, she is the, if you will, the number 3 person in the Pentagon. So you have a Secretary of Defense, think a CEO of a company. You have a Deputy Secretary of Defense, kind of the Deputy CEO. And then pretty much right below that is the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. It's kind of a mouthful, but it's the operations officer. It's the person in the Pentagon who looks at this vast machinery and decides whether to recommend to the president and to the Secretary of Defense. Does the carrier go to the Arabian Gulf, or does it go to the South China Sea? Does that battalion of Army Rangers go into the Middle East, or do we send them to Latin America? So it's the operations officer. It is the person who moves the chess pieces around the board. I worked with Michelle, day for day for years as commander of U.S. Southern Command, Latin America, and commander, obviously, of NATO and Europe. And she is absolutely outstanding. She would be an absolutely terrific Secretary of Defense.
So the chain of command that I referred to, I believe, is the president to the Secretary of Defense. It's not the vice president. It's not the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And it goes from the SecDef to the combatant commanders, of which you were one twice. And so I don't think there's ever been a woman at that level. Am I right about that in the chain of command?
You are correct. And just to clarify, she, just like the vice president, she's not in the chain of command. The chain of command, you nailed it, goes president, Secretary of Defense, combatant commander, the 4-star, the 10 4-star officers around the world, and then down to the troops, the Navy ships, the Air Force planes. Her role as the operations officer was to recommend where all of those chess pieces go, and she was pretty damn good at it.
Now, I want to correct something I misspoke earlier. I said there hadn't yet been an African-American woman Attorney General. Of course there was, Loretta Lynch. I was forgetting the last one, but the last Democratic appointee. But a lot of people want an African-American Secretary of Defense. And to me, this ought to be the last job that you worry about diversity. The Department of Defense is so vast. And I explain it to people this way. I've only been to Pentagon 3 times in my life. One time I went on a tour and I was completely befuddled where I was. It's the worst maze I have ever been in. I don't know how you get in and out of there every day. It's not like Justice. I can walk around Justice 30 years later and find the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. I know that Homeland Security is big and sprawling, but there's nothing like the Pentagon. Does anything translate to Pentagon experience, Admiral?
No, it doesn't. And however, we ought to point out that this is a case where the other candidates, the 2 that are most prominent, are in fact very qualified themselves. One, Jay Johnson, was the general counsel, the lawyer, the head lawyer for the entire Department of Defense. and then went on to be a cabinet secretary at Homeland Security, where, by the way, he ran the Coast Guard among many other agencies. So highly qualified individual. And then the name of the general that's popping up, Lloyd Austin, again, very experienced, a contemporary of mine, was commander U.S. Central Command as I was finishing my time as the NATO commander. So it's different skill sets you could choose to apply. If you want a Lloyd Austin, you're going to get a uniformed military who has that fine, Germans call it Fingerstuhl, the absolute feeling for the combat operations. Personally, I think having a military leader run the Pentagon is, generally speaking, former military, is not the right way to go. There's a reason we have waivers. You want a real fire break between civilians and military. You want civilian control of the military. But Lloyd would bring extreme knowledge of operations. Jay Johnson would bring very broad experience in the department, plus the connectivity with the Homeland Security, which is a significant part of the DoD role. Michelle is that all-court player, the Larry Bird, who makes everybody else on the court just look terrific. All three of them are terrific people. They're all three friends of mine. I think it's a good set of choices.
It is. Let me now raise the Republican point of view. Jay Johnson has been very moderate in his television appearances. There are a lot of them. So there will be a lot of confirmation. This is what Neera Tanden's running into, and I like Neera. I've told people I got more Neera scars than anybody, and I don't care. She's smart, and she's a liberal, and the president should get who he wants. But nevertheless, it's a longer confirmation. The general, I don't know, but no one is. I'm second to nobody in my admiration for General Mattis. People can watch our interview at the Nixon Foundation and see that. I just thought it was great. But when he got there, he stood up basically Central Command again. And the big rap from the Senate was he brought back all of his aides from CENTCOM and didn't bring in any Republicans. If it's General Austin, is that something they've got to guard against because there is this reflexive reach for the familiar?
100% correct. And the model here, interestingly, is the mirror image of this. And it is when Colin Powell, retired general, went to be the Secretary of State and lead America's diplomacy. And famously, Colin Powell walked into Foggy Bottom, walked into the headquarters of State Department all by himself. Didn't bring a single aide, didn't bring a single military person with him. He knew that he had to show the Foreign Service that he was there to be a diplomat for America. And in my view, did an absolutely terrific job as a Secretary of State. I think if you're going to bring a retired military, I would hope that they would follow the Colin Powell model. I think it's a pretty good one.
Now I want to switch over. I was on Meet the Press this Sunday, Admiral, and one of your friends, I'm sure, Admiral Mullins, was on, the former CNO. He was very critical of the strike in Iran against nuclear scientists, which is widely believed to have been the Israelis, though, of course, they never confirm nor deny. And I was a little surprised by that because what other countries do in their own national security interest isn't really up for American grab. I was wondering what you thought about the operation. I don't think it was ours. I don't believe we had foreknowledge of it. But what do you think about lecturing other countries about what they do in their own defense?
Well, first of all, let's look at the strike. I think from an Israeli perspective, it made a lot of sense. You take out one of the leading figures. We ought to be clear, however, taking out that particular scientist is not going to, I don't think, significantly slow down their program. That knowledge is well distributed at this point. But from an Israeli perspective, it discourages bright young people from participating in the program, shall we say. It forces the Iranians to apply more resources to protect their scientific core, and it embarrasses the Iranians deeply. I think that may be the worst blow of all. So from an Israeli perspective, it makes a lot of sense. From an Iranian perspective, it's terrible. It's a bill that will come due for Israel. There's just no question, particularly when you tie it to Soleimani's killing earlier in the year by the United States and the mysterious, with quotes around it, explosions all over the centrifugal pumps in the Iranian nuclear program. So there are a lot of bills that are going to come due on the Iranian side. From a U.S. side, it's a mixed picture, and it's in terms of putting pressure on Iran and seeing that pressure come to Iran, nothing wrong with that from a U.S. perspective. From our perspective, however, trying to get back to negotiations, it creates difficulties, frankly, for the incoming Biden administration.
Let me close with this, Admiral. You mentioned bills coming due. I remember when Bill Clinton acted expeditiously against a plot against George H.W. Bush by Saddam Hussein. That bill was attempted to be collected by the dictator, and he ended up getting a severe, significant rebuke. Do you expect Team Biden to do anything to Iran should they attempt to collect the bill on Soleimani from any American anywhere?
I do. And I think any administration would respond overwhelmingly if for example, an American diplomat, a U.S. ambassador serving abroad, was killed by terrorists masquerading as coming under Iranian guidance, perhaps masquerading as independent terrorists. I think if we had knowledge and we could pin that on Iran, we would respond massively. I have no doubt about that.
That's reassuring. That was what I hope you would say. Admiral James Stavridi, is always a pleasure. Hope your December is off to a good start. Follow him on Twitter at Stavridis. I always mispronounce it, but the Admiral's always kind, like Archbishop Chaput. Thank you, Admiral. Be well. I want to